What's going on, guys? In today's video, I want to talk about some of the most important principles if you want to get good at running, or even if you want to start incorporating lifting, or vice versa, whether you're coming from like that more traditional lifting, whether it's powerlifting or bodybuilding, and you want to get into running. And so the first two concepts that you really want to be thinking about in any of these disciplines is going to be the intensity and the volume. So intensity meaning the amount of effort you're putting into, for example, your runs. So that can think of your zone 1 to 2, and then 3, 4, and 5 is where you're starting to really ramp up that intensity. And then same thing in the gym, right? Like if you're used to that between 1 to 6 rep range, that's normally higher intensity. And then once you go past that into like the 8 to 20 rep range, that's going to be lower intensity, right? And so that's step one. Number two is going to be the volume aspect. So in running, the simplest way to look at that is your overall mileage, what you're doing in your day-to-day runs, but then also in your total mileage for the week. And then same thing with lifting weights, whether it's trying to add more sets and reps to your workouts. And so the reason why those two are so important, and I've had several people reach out to me now, so I figured I would just make a video on it within the Supwell community, is balancing those two. So let's take the first example, which is if you are a more traditional lifter and you're trying to get into running. So let's say, for example, you are starting off running 1 mile 3 days a week. Your total mileage that week, your total volume is going to be 3 miles. But depending on where your cardiovascular system is, depending on whether you are doing things like the Stairmaster, your weight being taken into account, those might be large impacts on your intensity. And so what you don't want to do is say, hey, I ran 3 miles this week, I'm going to jump up to 6 the following week, right? So you need to really be able to auto-regulate. And that's a very important term for all of this, especially if you don't have a coach. Auto-regulation. You have to check in with your body. You have to make sure that as you're trying to increase the volume or the intensity, you're checking in with yourself. So, as the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Make sure that you're taking those preventative steps along the way. So if something feels achy, especially if you're entering a new discipline, going back to the first example of a lifter getting into running, you don't want to push it because you might cause some additional strain, whether that's an Achilles flare-up, something in your knees or your hips, etc. So it's really important that you want to first focus on building the volume. And that's why I think a lot of people are, especially why a few years ago, I remember zone 2 maxing. Everyone needs to be running zone 2, because I think that was really a really good entryway for a lot of beginner or entry-level runners who are trying to start their running journey. At first, it's really going to be important for you to look at that overall volume. So let's say, for example, you ran 3 miles this week. Just add on another mile. That's a 33% increase in your mileage when you think about it that way. That's technically, from a percentage standpoint, a lot. And then over time, so maybe it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday the first week, you do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Friday for 4, and then you do Monday through Friday. And then once you hit that 5 mile point, that's when you want to start thinking of, okay, now let's get to the point where I can go for a long run. And the terms here are simply going to be based off of you. So a long run to you, if you've been running a mile every day during the week, a long run to you is 2 miles, right? And think about that. That makes sense, because that is literally double the mileage that you have ever done in any single run, right? So from here you go, so it'll be adding 1 mile a week starting off till you get to running 1 mile every day during the week, and then now you have a long run on Saturdays. So now you have 7 miles total. And then from there, you can start sprinkling in where you want to add the mileage, right? And again, here it's gonna really come down to, what are your goals? Do you want to get up to being able to running a marathon? Do you want to focus on really the 5K, 10K, for example? But again, all of those progressions are going to be super important, because at the end of the day, right, your long run will dictate where you really want to end up in your focus a lot of the time, right? So let's say, for example, over the course of 6 months to a year, you really just want your long run to be 8 miles. Then you're probably going to be slotted better for the 5K, 10K, just because that's going to be 3.2 and 6.4 miles respectively. And so those are important things to keep in mind. And again, that will be the best way for you to avoid injury, is that you're building up your volume slowly. And then over time, once you get to a point in your volume where you're at the range that you want to go for, so whether it's 30 miles a week, 40 miles a week, 50 miles a week, etc., you then want to start sprinkling in some intensity, right? And that's where the specificity, that's where the skill comes into running. I believe running is not just a matter of fitness, it is actually a matter of skill. And skill is something that needs to be worked on. That's why, for example, someone who does zone 2 maxing when they're training is not necessarily going to have the fastest 1 mile, because they haven't trained for that skill of executing in that mile range. Or another way to put it is they haven't tested that part of their body system. And that system, to me, I interpret that as a skill that needs to be trained over time as well. So very important to keep in mind, but first things first, volume is going to be key. And so let's start from the other end of the spectrum. What if you're a runner that wants to start lifting? Same concept applies, but it's going to look a little bit different. So you, for example, run 6 days a week, just add in 1 day a week to start. Just go to the gym. Ideally, again, we want to keep that intensity low. We don't want to potentially try to tax the system too much. So let's just go for that 8 to 12 rep range. I strongly believe that as runners, a lot of the injuries that come up come from overuse and underdevelopment. Overuse of the muscles that are being used to run every single day, and underdevelopment of the muscles that actually support the overall structure. So say, for example, like, oh, your knee might be hurting. Oh, I must have weak knees. I need to strengthen my knees, do some quad work. No, it could actually be your hips have gotten weak over time, or your ankles. Again, your body works as a system, so it's really important to keep that in mind. And I think that's something that's often overlooked, especially for someone like myself. I am a bigger runner. I'm between 195 and 200 pounds. And I found that when I actually stopped strength training, I had more injuries coming up because my body had gotten weaker in those supportive areas. And I think it's important to find that balance here. So if you're a runner, I would suggest starting with 1 day a week. And again, whatever your motivation may be, if it's just working on your lower body and just making sure that your lower body stays healthy for running, great. But if you want to take the more holistic, like total body approach, because one can argue that like you need a strong back to keep you upright as you're running, and then you just want everything to be balanced, then you want to start incorporating some upper body work as well. But again, the important thing here is just building the volume first. So just tack on 1 day a week. Let's say you do 2 leg exercises, and then you're just aiming for 8 to 12. And again, lifting, just like running, is a skill. When you first go to the gym, you need to make sure that you're focusing on your technique and that you're actually executing the muscles properly. You don't want to go to the gym, for example, and do a deadlift and then just start lifting with your back. That's going to cause a lot of problems. So, and I know there's a lot of channels out there that go into how to execute the technique properly for a myriad of lifts. So would definitely recommend looking into those and starting there. Some of my favorites personally for my lower body are going to be hex bar deadlifts and then Bulgarian split squats. Both of those have helped tremendously with keeping my hips and my glutes strong, which has helped alleviate a lot of problems with my knees because I have some hip instability when I'm running, and that puts a lot of pressure on my knee as a result. And so ever since I've started incorporating more of those have helped a lot. So again, always start with the volume and then add on intensity afterwards. So once you get to a certain point, for example, like myself, I lift 2 to 3 days a week. One of those days is a strength training day where I'll do some hex bar deadlifts for 2 sets of 3. So for me, I'm doing 315 pounds on the hex bar deadlift for 3 reps for 2 sets. And then from there, I'll do my Bulgarian split squats. I'll aim for 6 to 8 reps, and then I'll do 2 sets of that as well. Again, just enough volume and intensity to keep the system strong, but not overtaxing it and inhibiting the running. And I think that's going to be the next portion here that I really want to focus on, is balancing the two. So it's truly polarized training when you think about it, because on the one end of the spectrum with running, it's a lot of repetition, right? It's a lot of inherent volume, especially if you're into the more endurance side of it. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you don't necessarily want to do that on the lifting side, because if it's both high volume, it's inherently going to fatigue you, and your body only has so much energy, so much capability to handle that. And so that's what I find a lot of the times people will have injury flare-ups with. Even myself, I accidentally overcooked it one week, and I added an extra set onto my deadlifts, and then my legs were cooked for the week. So again, it's important to check in with yourself and make sure that you're listening to your body, because with all of these things, auto-regulation is going to be the key. And you want to auto-regulate the secondary, not the primary. So for example, if your primary thing is running, auto-regulate the lifting. So for example, if I know I have an intense week of running coming up, like I'm running 50 miles that week, I'm going to have a hard workout on Tuesday and then a long run workout on Saturday, I'm probably going to just auto-regulate the lifting to then be lower, right? I'm going to have less sets. I might even take one of those days off just so I can make sure I'm executing on the primary goal I have. And then same thing on the other end. If you're a lifter and that's your primary focus, but you want to incorporate running for your cardiovascular system benefits and everything that it can do there, you definitely want to make sure that you're auto-regulating this as well. So maybe it's like, okay, I want to focus on getting stronger in the gym. Okay, then maybe you don't have any intense workouts, and maybe you're just doing your maintenance running of running, you know, like the example I used, you're just running your 5 days a week, and then you have that long run on Saturday, and then you go from there. And a word on that I will say is the importance of scheduling all of this. This is something that when I work with my running coach, I'll give a quick shout out to her, Rachel Tomajczyk. She's my doubles partner from college, wife. She's a professional trail runner. She's amazing, a phenomenal coach. Would highly recommend her to anyone. She and I, when we first started working together, I was coming from that lifting bias. And so when we were talking through, I was like, okay, how can I schedule this so I can still work, so I can still have my workouts and maintain my muscle as I get back into running? And so the way she explained it was this, is that you want your intense days to be your intense days. So my workouts for running are on Tuesdays and Saturdays respectively. My most intense leg lifting days are on Tuesdays. So and the thought process there is, because if you start spacing out the intensity between the two, then you're basically burning both ends of the candle at the same time. And so before, what I used to do is I would try to go, oh, okay, so I'll just do my heavier workout the day after my hard run. That was horrible. My legs did not recover. My legs were shot for the rest of the week. My long runs were always gonna be like, there was like a 30% failure rate. But then when I switched it to then all my intensity for the week is on that Tuesday, my legs felt awful on Wednesday, but by Friday they started coming around, and then Saturday my body was ready for the long run. So it's also important to think of how you're actually scheduling your workouts and your lifts as well. And I think that's something important to keep in mind, whether you're just a runner or just lifting. So for example, if you're just running, completely fine, you want to make sure you have enough time in between those workout sessions for your legs to fully recover. You can't, like, doing back-to-backs or even, the day after or 2 days after, that's probably not going to give your body enough time to recover. And then same thing on the lifting side. You're probably not going to try to hit a squat PR the day after you do a deadlift PR. That just sounds like a rough time for everyone. So just to recap everything here, important to keep in mind as you go through your running and your lifting or whatever skill you're trying to get involved doing, the first thing you want to focus on is volume. Volume gives you not only the physical adaptations, it's also going to help give you the skill of getting into running or lifting. And then over time, you then want to start adding in these intensity workouts, because that's where you'll then be able to make greater gains in specificity. So again, if you want to be thinking of specificity, whether you want to get better at the 5K, 10K, or you want to do the half marathon or marathon, that's where you want to start adding in those intensifiers that is going to make your body have those more specific adaptations for those events. So I hope you guys find this useful. And with that being said, we'll talk soon. Have a nice day.